I'm Major Laura Reynolds, 33 years old, and I built my life serving in the U.S. Air Force. For years, I sent money home, showed up for my family, and tried to bridge the gap with a father who only saw my choices as betrayal. But when he spat at me at my own sister's wedding 13 years after disowning me, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated or cast aside by someone you gave everything to? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand tall and set boundaries after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories of resilience. What happened next might surprise you. I was 19 when I first noticed the change with my dad, Thomas Reynolds. He'd always been stern, the kind of father who expected results, not excuses, but after my mom passed and my sister Claire grew closer to him, something shifted. The sharpness in his voice toward me deepened. It started with dismissive jokes at family gatherings. Comments like, "The military isn't a woman's place," delivered with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I enlisted, instead of pride, he gave me silence. At dinners, his warmth toward Claire made the contrast starker. He'd ask about her college classes, her friends, her plans. To me, he'd offer little jabs, "Guess you'll be too busy pretending to be a soldier to help out here." They were small cracks at first, easy to dismiss as grief or stress. But I knew they were leading somewhere darker. I tried to understand it. Mom's death had gutted all of us, but Thomas had taken it hardest. She'd been the buffer, the translator between his rigid expectations and my stubborn independence. Without her, we didn't know how to talk to each other anymore. Claire, younger and softer, seemed to fill that void for him. She reminded him of Mom in ways I never could, gentle, accommodating, always willing to smooth over tension with a smile. I was different. I'd always been the tomboy daughter who followed him into the garage on Saturday mornings, who learned how to change oil before I could legally drive. I tagged along on fishing trips where we'd sit in comfortable silence for hours. He used to call me Soldier back then, a nickname that felt like approval, like he saw something in me worth recognizing. But after Mom died, that nickname stopped. The fishing trips ended. The garage became his solitary domain again. When I told him I was enlisting in the Air Force, I thought maybe it would bring back some of that old connection. I thought he'd see that I was becoming the person he'd once seemed proud of. Instead, he looked at me like I'd announced I was throwing my life away. "That's your plan," he said, not even glancing up from the newspaper. "Running off to play G.I. Jane?" Claire had tried to mediate in her way. "Dad, come on. Laura's always wanted to serve. Wanting something doesn't make it smart," he'd replied, and that was the end of the conversation. At family events over the next few months, the distance became more pronounced. Christmas dinner, I sat at the end of the table while he and Claire discussed her internship prospects. Thanksgiving, he toasted her academic achievements and barely acknowledged my presence. When relatives asked about my plans, he'd change the subject or leave the room entirely. I kept hoping it was temporary. That once I got through basic training, once I proved I was serious, he'd come around. I sent letters from Lackland Air Force Base, short updates about training, about the people I was meeting, about how much I was learning. He never wrote back. Claire would call and mention that he'd received them, that he'd read them, but that was all. No response, no acknowledgement. When I came home on my first leave, I wore my uniform. I thought maybe seeing me in it, seeing that this wasn't a phase or a rebellion, would shift something. I walked into the house with my duffel bag, my cover tucked under my arm, and found him in the kitchen. He looked me over, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker, maybe pride, maybe regret. But then his jaw tightened. "You look ridiculous," he said, and walked out of the room. I stood there in the kitchen, Claire staring at me with wide, apologetic eyes. I wanted to follow him, to demand an explanation, to ask what I'd done to deserve this. But I didn't. I just picked up my bag and went to my old room, which already felt like it belonged to someone else. The rest of that leave was tense. Thomas barely spoke to me. When he did, it was in clipped sentences, "Pass the salt," or "Your sister needs a ride." Claire did her best to keep the peace, but even she couldn't bridge the gap that had opened between us. I cut the visit short, told them I had to report back early. It was a lie, but it was easier than sitting in that house, feeling like a stranger. Before I left, I tried one more time. I found him in the garage, working on his truck. "Dad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't understand why you're so angry with me." He didn't look up. "I'm not angry." "Then what is this?" He set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, and finally met my eyes. "You made your choice, Laura. Don't expect me to celebrate it." "I'm not asking you to celebrate. I'm asking you to talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about." He picked up the wrench again, dismissing me. "You wanted to go your own way. Fine. But don't come back here looking for approval." I left the next morning before he woke up. Claire drove me to the airport, crying the whole way. "He'll come around," she kept saying. "He just needs time." But I wasn't sure time would fix this. The way he looked at me, or rather, the way he refused to look at me, felt final. It felt like he'd already decided who I was and what I was worth, and nothing I did would change his mind. Back on base, I threw myself into work. I trained harder, studied longer, volunteered for every assignment I could. If I couldn't earn my father's respect, I'd earn it somewhere else. My instructors noticed. My peers noticed. I was building something, a reputation, a career, a life, that had nothing to do with Thomas Reynolds or his approval. But late at night, in the quiet of my barracks, I'd replay those last conversations. I'd think about the fishing trips, the garage, the man who used to ruffle my hair and call me soldier. I'd wonder where that father had gone, and if he'd ever come back. The truth was, I already knew the answer. That father was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw my ambition as betrayal, my independence as abandonment. Someone who'd rather lose me than accept that I was different from what he'd imagined. It was a grief that had no name, no funeral, no closure. Just a slow, steady erosion of something I'd thought was permanent. And the worst part was knowing that I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd just become myself, and that was the one thing he couldn't forgive. The break came on my last leave before deployment. I stopped by the house, hoping maybe time and distance had softened things. I was in uniform again, not to make a point, but because I'd come straight from base and didn't see the harm. I thought maybe he'd at least be civil. He was in the living room when I walked in reading. He looked up, saw me standing there in my blues, and his expression hardened immediately. "Didn't know you were coming," he said, not moving from his chair. "Claire told me you'd be home. I wanted to see you before I shipped out." He set down his book, slowly, deliberately. "Shipped out where?" "Middle East. Can't say exactly where yet." He stared at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was when he'd realized what was happening, that I was going into danger, that we might not get another chance. Instead, he looked me over like I was wearing a costume. "Don't bother coming back if you die chasing someone else's war," he said. The words hung in the air, cold and final. I felt something crack inside me, something I'd been holding together through all the dismissals and silences. This wasn't disappointment or frustration. This was rejection, plain and stated. "That's it," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "That's what you have to say to me?" "What do you want me to say, Laura? That I'm proud? That I support this?" He stood, crossing his arms. "You made your choice. You chose this over your family. I didn't choose anything over you. I chose a career. I chose to serve. You chose to leave. Mom's death doesn't mean I have to stop living my life." His face darkened at the mention of her. "Don't bring your mother into this." "Why not? You think she'd want this? You think she'd want you cutting me out because I didn't follow the script you wrote?" "Get out," he said quietly. I didn't move. "Dad," I said, "get out." Louder now, sharp enough that I heard Claire's door open upstairs. "You want to play soldier? Fine. But don't come back here expecting me to pretend this is normal. Don't expect a home here anymore." Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "Dad, stop. Please." But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, and there was nothing in his eyes but cold finality. I picked up my bag, the one I hadn't even had a chance to set down, and walked toward the door. "Laura, wait," Claire started down the stairs, but I shook my head. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. "I'll call you." I walked out, got in my car, and drove back to base. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, the words, "Don't expect a home here anymore," playing on repeat in my head. A week later, my Aunt Helen called. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice careful. "Your father's been talking to relatives. He's telling people you're dead to him." I sat down on my bunk, phone pressed to my ear. "What?" "He said it at dinner last night. Said he doesn't have 2 daughters anymore. Just Claire." "He actually said that?" "Word for word, honey." "I'm sorry. I thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up. Then I called him, one last time. He answered on the 3rd ring. "It's me," I said. Silence. Then, "I don't have anything to say to you. Aunt Helen told me what you said. That I'm dead to you." More silence. I waited, giving him a chance to deny it, to explain, to take it back. "If that's what she told you, then she told you the truth," he said finally. "Dad," he hung up. I sat there holding the phone. That relatives were hearing his version of events, that he was painting me as the one who left, the one who chose wrong. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was. But mostly I was just hollow. I'd lost my mother to cancer and my father to bitterness, and there was nothing I could do about either. Deployment was almost a relief. In Kandahar, there was no room for family drama. There was heat and dust and the constant low-grade fear that came with being in a war zone. There were missions to fly, objectives to complete, people counting on me to do my job. The simplicity of it, the clear chain of command, the defined goals, was almost comforting after the chaos of trying to understand my father's rejection. My unit became my family. We looked out for each other, trusted each other in ways that went beyond words. When you're in a place where the wrong decision means someone dies, you learn quickly who has your back and who doesn't. These people had my back. They didn't care about my father's opinion or whether I fit some narrow definition of what a daughter should be. They cared about whether I could do my job and whether I'd be there when it mattered. I stopped writing letters home. I stopped expecting calls. I accepted the truth. Thomas Reynolds had chosen to erase me, and I had to carry on without his approval. It was grief, but it was also, in a strange way, a kind of freedom. I didn't have to wonder anymore what would make him proud or how to bridge the gap between us. The gap was permanent. I could stop trying. Before all that, before the silence and the rejection, we'd been close. Not in an obvious, demonstrative way. Thomas wasn't the type to throw his arm around your shoulder or tell you he loved you out loud, but in the small, steady ways that mattered. I was the daughter who followed him into the garage on Saturday mornings, who handed him tools before he asked for them, because I'd learned the rhythm of his work. I learned how to change a tire before I had my license, how to check oil and replace air filters and jump the dead battery. He used to call me soldier back then, long before I ever thought about enlisting. It started as a joke when I was maybe 7 or 8, after I'd refused to cry when I fell off my bike and scraped up my knees. "Tough as nails," he'd said, ruffling my hair. "That's my little soldier." The nickname stuck. When I brought home good grades, when I made the varsity soccer team, when I fixed the lawnmower myself instead of asking for help, that's my soldier. It felt like approval, like recognition. Like he saw something in me that was worth acknowledging. Claire was different. She leaned toward dance recitals and pageants, toward things that required grace and presentation. She was good at them, too, won awards, got her picture in the local paper a few times. Thomas supported her, showed up to every performance, clapped in the right places. But with me, there was something else. A kind of understanding, maybe, or at least I thought there was. When Claire was practicing her routines, Thomas and I would be out back throwing a football or working on some project in the garage. We didn't talk much during those times. Didn't need to. Mom was the one who could translate between us. She understood Thomas's silences, knew when they meant approval and when they meant frustration. She understood my stubbornness, my need to prove myself. When we butted heads, which wasn't often, back then, she'd step in, smooth things over, remind us that we were more alike than either of us wanted to admit. She got sick when I was 16. Breast cancer, aggressive and fast-moving. The treatments bought her a couple years, but they also drained her, left her a shadow of who she'd been. I tried to help however I could. Picked up extra shifts at my part-time job to help with medical bills. took over grocery shopping and cooking when she was too exhausted, drove her to appointments when Thomas couldn't get off work. Claire helped too, in her way. She'd sit with Mom, read to her, keep her company. She was better at the emotional support, the gentle comfort. I was better at the practical tasks, the things that needed doing. We divided the labor without discussing it, each playing to our strengths. Thomas worked more during those years, pulling overtime and extra shifts. I thought it was to cover the bills, and maybe it was. But I also think he couldn't bear to watch Mom fade. He was a man of action, someone who fixed problems with his hands and his will. Cancer wasn't something he could fix, and that helplessness ate at him. After she died, something in him broke. Or maybe it just revealed what had always been there beneath the surface. The quiet mornings in the garage stopped. The fishing trips, those long Sundays where we'd drive out to the lake, sit in the boat, and barely exchange 10 words, disappeared. He pulled away from me and pulled Claire closer, like he was afraid of losing anyone else. I tried to understand. Grief does strange things to people, makes them irrational and defensive. I told myself he just needed time, that eventually we'd find our way back to each other. But the distance kept growing. When I told him I was enlisting, I thought maybe it would help. I thought he'd see that I was serious about building a life, about making something of myself. I thought the nickname, Soldier, meant he'd approve of me actually becoming one. Instead, it was like I'd betrayed him. Like by choosing the military, I was choosing to leave him the same way Mom had left, even though that made no sense. I wasn't dying. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was just growing up and making my own choices. But he couldn't see it that way. To him, every step I took away from the life he'd imagined for me was a step away from the family. Claire staying local for college, living at home, being available whenever he needed her, that was loyalty. Me leaving for basic training, committing to years of service that would take me far away, that was betrayal. I'd helped out when bills piled up after Mom's treatment. I'd sent money home during my initial training, even though I barely had any to spare. I'd stayed in touch, written letters, called when I could. Loyalty was never lacking on my end. I'd given everything I could without asking for anything back. That's why the betrayal cut so deep when it finally came. It wasn't just that he rejected my choices or disapproved of my career. It was that he erased years of effort and love, years of showing up and being there, as if none of it had ever mattered. As if the moment I stepped out of line with his expectations, everything I'd been and done before that point became worthless. I think about those garage mornings sometimes. The smell of motor oil and old concrete. The sound of metal on metal, the satisfying click of a bolt threading into place. The rare moments when he'd explain something to me, patient and careful, making sure I understood not just how to do it, but why it worked that way. I think about the fishing trips, the silence that felt comfortable instead of tense. The way he'd hand me a sandwich from the cooler without a word, and I'd eat it watching the line drift on the water. The few times we actually caught something worth keeping, how he'd show me how to clean it properly, his hands steady and sure. Those memories don't fit with the man who told me not to come home. They don't align with someone who could cut his daughter out of his life over a career choice. But they're the same person, and I have to hold both truths at once. The father I loved and the father who rejected me. Claire used to say I reminded him too much of himself. That's why we clashed. That we were both too stubborn to bend, too proud to admit when we were hurt. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why he took my leaving so personally, because if he'd been in my position at 19, he might have done the same thing. And he couldn't forgive himself for that, so he couldn't forgive me either. Or maybe I'm giving him too much credit. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just preferred Claire softer, easier, more willing to be shaped into what he needed. Maybe I'd always been too much work, too different, and Mom's death just gave him an excuse to stop trying. I'll never know for sure. That's the hardest part, the uncertainty. Not understanding what I did wrong or what I could have done differently. Just knowing that I lost him, and I don't know why. When he disowned me, it hollowed me out in ways I didn't expect. On base, I kept my head high, my performance sharp. I showed up on time, did my job, earned my qualifications. To anyone watching, I was fine, maybe even thriving. But in the quiet moments, in the empty spaces between duties, I replayed every conversation, every interaction, trying to find where I'd lost him. I wrote letters I never sent. They piled up in a drawer in my quarters, page after page of words I needed to say but knew he'd never hear. "I'm still your daughter," I wrote in one. "I didn't leave you. I just grew up." In another, "I wish you'd just see me. Not who you wanted me to be, but who I actually am." Some were angry, full of accusations about his selfishness and his cruelty. Others were pleading, almost desperate, asking for a second chance, for any sign that he still cared. I never sent any of them. What would be the point? He'd made himself clear. I was dead to him, and dead people don't get mail. Claire called every few weeks, trying to keep me updated on family news. "Dad's doing okay," she'd say, her voice carefully neutral. "He's been working a lot. Keeping busy." She never directly addressed the rift, but I could hear the strain in her voice. She was caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both of us, while knowing she couldn't fix what was broken. "How are you doing?" she'd ask, and I'd give her the easy answers. "Training's good. Weather's hot. Mission went well." I didn't tell her about the letters or the nights I couldn't sleep, thinking about the last things he said to me. I didn't tell her that sometimes I'd see older men on base, gruff, serious types who reminded me of Thomas, and I'd feel this sharp ache in my chest. Kandahar was dust and heat and sudden violence. The kind of place that stripped everything down to essentials: stay alert, trust your unit, complete the mission. There was no room for family drama or emotional processing. When you're running operations in a war zone, you can't afford distraction. People die when you're not focused. My unit became everything. Captain James Carter, who'd later marry Claire, was one of the best officers I've ever worked with. Calm under pressure, decisive, willing to listen to input from everyone regardless of rank. We ran joint operations, Air Force and Army coordination, and the trust we built was absolute. When he said he'd cover my 6, I knew he meant it. When I told him I'd get him home, that was a promise. There was a mission, about 8 months into my deployment, that changed things. Intelligence had reported a high-value target in a compound outside the city. Multi-service operation, Army going in on the ground, Air Force providing overwatch and extraction if things went sideways. James was leading his team in. I was coordinating air support. The intelligence was wrong. It was a trap. James's team got pinned down in a kill box, taking fire from 3 directions. Their planned extraction route was blown. Radio chatter was chaos, shouting, gunfire, someone screaming for a medic. I made a call. Unauthorized, risky, the kind of thing that could end a career if it went wrong. I redirected a chopper that was supposed to be on standby for a different operation. Gave them coordinates for James's position, told them to go in hot. Then I coordinated covering fire from our position to give them a window to extract. It worked. Barely. James's team got out with 2 wounded but no Kia. The chopper took rounds but made it back. My commanding officer chewed me out for breaking protocol, then quietly put me in for a commendation. "Don't do that again," he said. "But good work." James found me later that night. "You saved our lives," he said simply. "Thank you." I shrugged it off. "Just doing my job." "No," he said. "You went out on a limb. That wasn't protocol. That was you making a call that could have gotten you court-martialed. We owe you." I didn't know then that he'd end up marrying Claire, that our lives would intersect in ways beyond the military. At that moment, he was just a fellow officer, someone I'd served with, someone whose life I'd helped preserve. It felt good, pulling him out of that situation. It felt like proof that I belonged here, that this work mattered. The loyalty of my unit kept me alive in more ways than one. Physically, yes, we watched each other's backs, covered each other's mistakes, made sure everyone came home. But also mentally, emotionally. These people knew me as Captain Laura Reynolds, not as Thomas's disappointment. They respected my skills, my judgment, my leadership. Their approval wasn't conditional on me being something I wasn't. I stopped expecting calls from home. I stopped checking my email hoping for a message from Thomas. I accepted the truth. He'd chosen to erase me, and I had to move forward without his blessing. It was grief, real, painful grief for a relationship that had died even though both people were still alive. But it was also release. The silence gave me space to grow into who I was without bending for him. I developed my own command style, my own approach to leadership and decision-making. I learned what I was capable of under pressure. I built friendships based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than blood relation. I started to see my worth reflected back at me through the people I served with, and slowly, that became more real than Thomas's rejection. There were still hard days. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the anniversary of Mom's death, those days hit harder. I'd see other service members getting care packages from family, talking on the phone with loved ones back home, and I'd feel that familiar ache. But I learned to sit with it, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. One night, maybe a year into deployment, I finally threw away the unsent letters. All of them. I didn't even reread them first, just took the whole stack and tossed it in the burn barrel. Watching them go up in flames felt ceremonial somehow. Like I was finally letting go of the idea that I could make him understand, that I could find the right words to change his mind. He'd made his choice. I'd made mine. We were both going to have to live with that. The war clarified things in a way civilian life never had. Out here, you learned quickly what mattered: integrity, competence, courage. You learned who could be counted on and who couldn't. You learned that approval from the right people, the people who actually knew you and saw you clearly, was worth more than desperate attempts to win over someone who'd already decided you weren't enough. I came out of Kandahar different than I went in. Harder in some ways, more certain in others. I knew who I was and what I was worth. I'd earned my rank, my decorations, my reputation. I'd saved lives and completed missions and proven myself over and over. And if Thomas Reynolds couldn't see that, couldn't respect that, couldn't find it in himself to be proud of the person I'd become, that was his loss, not mine. 13 years passed. 13 years of promotions and deployments, of building a career and a life that had nothing to do with my father. I rose through the ranks steadily, earned my decorations, carried scars both visible and hidden. I dated occasionally, though nothing stuck, too many moves, too much time away. My real relationships were with my unit, my fellow officers, the people who understood what this life required. I thought about Thomas sometimes, but less often as the years went on. The sharp pain of his rejection had dulled to something more like an old injury, a thing that ached in bad weather, but didn't stop you from functioning. Claire and I stayed in touch, though we were careful to avoid talking about him. She'd update me on her life, her master's degree, her job, and eventually, her relationship with James. I was genuinely happy for her when she told me they were engaged. Then the wedding invitation came. Cream cardstock with elegant calligraphy, formally requesting my presence at the marriage of Claire Elizabeth Reynolds to James Michael Carter. I held it for a long time, reading and rereading the names. James Carter. My mind went immediately to Kandahar, to the extraction, to the man I'd helped pull out of a kill box. I'd lost touch with him after that deployment. We'd connected on social media, exchanged a few messages over the years, but that was it. I hadn't known he'd met Claire. Hadn't known they were even in contact. I called her. James Carter, I said when she answered. My James Carter? From Kandahar. She laughed. Small world, right? We met at a veterans benefit in the city about 2 years ago. He remembered your name from my Facebook photos and asked if we were related. We started talking and she trailed off, happy and a little embarrassed. It just worked. That's amazing, Claire. I'm really happy for you. There was a pause. Then, carefully, I want you there, Laura. At the wedding. I know it's complicated, but you're my sister. I need you there. Well, I didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Dad will be there, yes. But this is my day. Our day. I'm not letting his issues dictate who gets to celebrate with us. I almost said no. The thought of seeing Thomas after 13 years of silence made my stomach clench. What would I say? What would he say? Would he even acknowledge me, or would I just be another guest, a stranger in formal dress sitting in his line of sight? But this was Claire's wedding. Claire, who'd never turned her back on me, who'd kept calling and texting and sending Christmas cards even when I didn't always respond promptly. Claire, who was marrying a man I'd served with, whose life I'd helped save. I owed her more than my attendance. I owed her my support. I'll be there, I said. Thank you, she breathed. That means everything. I made arrangements. Requested leave, bought a dress uniform, booked a hotel. I told myself I'd show up, stand tall, and leave quietly. No scenes, no confrontations. This wasn't about Thomas or me or our broken relationship. This was about Claire and James starting their life together. The church was beautiful, all white flowers and soft lighting. I arrived early, hoping to avoid too many awkward encounters. A few relatives recognized me, did double takes, came over to say hello. Most were polite but cautious, clearly unsure how to navigate the family drama. Aunt Helen hugged me tight. Good to see you, honey. You look strong. I am strong, I said, and meant it. Then I saw him across the aisle. Thomas Reynolds, older and grayer than in my memories, but still unmistakably himself. The same sharp eyes, the same set to his jaw. He was talking with someone, laughing at something they'd said, completely at ease. Then he glanced my direction and the laughter died. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the church. 13 years of silence compressed into a handful of seconds. I couldn't read his expression, anger, maybe, or discomfort. Certainly not welcome. He looked away first, turning back to his conversation like I hadn't been there at all. I took my seat on the bride's side, several rows back. Breathed deeply, reminded myself why I was here. The ceremony was starting soon. I just had to get through this. The wedding was beautiful. Claire looked radiant. James looked sharp in his dress uniform. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure, the same voice that had coordinated tactics under fire. Claire's voice shook slightly, but her smile was pure joy. I found myself tearing up despite my best efforts to stay composed. At the reception, I positioned myself strategically close enough to Claire and James to show support, far enough from Thomas to avoid immediate confrontation. I congratulated the couple, hugged my sister, shook James's hand. Congratulations, Captain, I said. She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, he replied, then lowered his voice. I'm glad you're here. Claire was worried you might not come. I almost didn't. But I'm glad I did. I was making my way toward the bar when it happened. Thomas appeared beside me, wine glass in hand. He'd clearly had a few drinks already. His face was flushed, his movements slightly unsteady. Surprised you showed up, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. I turned to face him. Claire invited me. Claire feels sorry for you. Don't mistake pity for wanting you here. People were starting to notice. I could feel eyes turning our direction, conversations quieting. I kept my voice level. I'm not here for you. I'm here for my sister. He stepped closer, and I smelled the wine on his breath. You're only here because they felt sorry for you. Then he spat. Not at me, but on the floor by my shoes. Deliberate, contemptuous, meant to humiliate. I froze, every muscle locked. The room had gone silent now. This was it, the confrontation I'd hoped to avoid, playing out in front of everyone. Before I could respond, before I could decide whether to walk away or stand my ground, James was there. James stepped between us smoothly, his posture calm but unmistakably authoritative. He addressed Thomas with the same respectful firmness I'd heard him use in tense situations overseas, the tone of someone who knows he's right and won't back down. Actually, sir, James said clearly, she saved my life. The room, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath. Thomas blinked, confusion crossing his face. Excuse me? In Kandahar. I was pinned down with my team, taking fire from 3 directions. Your daughter coordinated an unauthorized extraction that got us out alive. She risked her career to save mine and 8 other soldiers. James paused, letting that sink in. You owe your son-in-law's life to the woman you're spitting on. The color drained from Thomas's face. His mouth opened, then closed. Around us, I could hear murmurs as people processed what James had just said. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else, I had no idea. Thomas's wine glass trembled slightly in his hand. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 13 years. I saw recognition there, and something that might have been shame, but also defensiveness. The stubborn pride that wouldn't let him admit he'd been wrong. I didn't, he started, then stopped. Tried again. Nobody told me, would it have mattered? I asked quietly. The question hung there, unanswerable. He didn't respond. Just stood there, the wine glass shaking in his grip, his carefully maintained narrative crumbling in front of everyone who'd believed it. For years, he'd been telling people I was the one who'd left, the one who'd chosen career over family. Now they were seeing something different. Claire appeared at James's side, her face pale but determined. Dad, I think you should go. Claire, I know, Dad. Her voice was firm, final. This is my wedding. James is my husband. And Laura is my sister. If you can't treat her with respect, then leave. Thomas looked at her, stunned. I'd never heard Claire speak to him like that, direct, unyielding, without her usual gentle diplomacy. The baby of the family, his favorite, was choosing my side. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He set his wine glass down on a nearby table with unsteady hands and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, nobody meeting his eyes. Aunt Helen followed him out, probably to make sure he got home safely. The silence lasted another beat, then two. Then the DJ, bless him, started the music again, something upbeat and innocuous, and conversations slowly resumed. People were trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed that scene, but I could feel their eyes on me, sense the shift in how they were seeing me. Claire hugged me tight. I'm so sorry, she said into my shoulder. I knew he might be difficult, but I didn't think it's not your fault. I pulled back, managed a smile. Your wedding shouldn't be about this. He had no right, I know. But it's done now. I squeezed her hand. Go dance with your husband. Enjoy your night. I'm fine. She searched my face, unconvinced, but James touched her elbow gently. She's right. This is our night. Let's not let him take that from us. They moved toward the dance floor. I watched them go, then became aware of people approaching me, relatives, family, friends, even some of James's army buddies who'd been at the wedding. They wanted to shake my hand, thank me for my service, tell me they hadn't known about what happened in Kandahar. Some apologized for believing Thomas's version of events. Others just offered quiet support. It was overwhelming in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd been the ghost at the family table, the daughter who didn't exist. Now, suddenly, I was visible again. Real. Not the disappointing failure Thomas had painted me as, but someone who'd earned her place through action and sacrifice. An older cousin, someone I barely remembered, approached with watery eyes. I'm ashamed, he said bluntly. We all just accepted what Thomas said about you. Never questioned it. Never reached out. That was wrong. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to be angry. They should have questioned it, should have reached out, but mostly I just felt tired. It's complicated, I said finally. Family always is. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I danced with James, who thanked me again for coming. I meant what I said, he told me. About Kandahar. You didn't just save my life. You showed me what real leadership looks like. You would have done the same for me. Maybe, but you did it first. He smiled. I'm lucky to have you as a sister-in-law. Even if the family situation is complicated. That's one word for it. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself outside on the venue's patio, away from the noise and the crowd. The air was cool, a relief after the warmth inside. I was thinking about leaving, about heading back to my hotel and processing everything that had happened, when Claire joined me. You okay? She asked, leaning against the railing beside me. Yeah, I think so. He called. Dad. He's at home. He wants to talk. I looked at her. What did you tell him? That it's not up to me. That if he wants to talk to you, he needs to call you himself. She paused. Will you answer if he does? I thought about it. 13 years of silence, broken by a public humiliation that had backfired on him. Was there anything he could say now that would matter? Any apology that could undo the years of erasure? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. Eventually. But not tonight. That's fair. Claire was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, you know. For coming. For handling that with such grace. I don't know if I could have stayed as calm. I've had a lot of practice controlling my reactions under pressure. She smiled slightly. The military training comes in handy. Something like that. We stood there together, sisters separated by years and circumstances, but still connected. The music from inside drifted out, something slow and romantic, probably the last dance of the night. "You should get back in there," I said. "It's your wedding. Come with me. One more dance before everyone leaves." I followed her inside. The night ended with toasts and farewells, with Claire and James leaving in a shower of birdseed, with guests slowly dispersing to their cars. I helped Aunt Helen gather some of the decorations, made small talk with a few lingering relatives, then finally headed to my hotel. In my room, I changed out of my uniform, hung it carefully in the closet. My phone showed 3 missed calls from an unknown number. I knew without checking that it was probably Thomas. He'd gotten my number from someone, was trying to reach me now that his audience was gone. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and got ready for bed. Maybe I'd listen to the voicemails tomorrow. Maybe I wouldn't. For tonight, I just needed to rest. The last thought before I fell asleep was how different the day had been from what I'd expected. I'd come prepared to be invisible, to slip in and out without making waves. Instead, I'd been seen, really seen, by people who'd spent years looking past me. James had made sure of that. The power dynamic had flipped. For the first time, Thomas was the one who'd been exposed, who'd been shown to be wrong. I hadn't needed to defend myself or argue my case. The truth had done that for me. It felt like vindication. Not the triumphant kind where you gloat over someone else's downfall, but something quieter. The simple satisfaction of knowing that what you've done matters, that the people who count recognize your worth, that you don't need permission or approval from the person who rejected you. The calls kept coming. Over the next week, Thomas tried to reach me 4 more times. He left voicemails, I could see them stacking up, but I didn't listen to them. Not yet. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. Claire, back from her honeymoon, called to check in. "He's been asking about you," she said carefully. "Wants to know if you've called him back." I haven't. I figured. He seems different. Quieter. I think what happened at the wedding really shook him. "Good," I said, then softened. I don't mean that to sound harsh. I just mean maybe it's time he understood that actions have consequences. He left me a long voicemail, Claire continued. About Mom, about you, about how he handled everything. He didn't exactly apologize, but he came close. Said he'd been wrong about some things. Some things. I know. It's not enough. I told him that. She paused. But I also think he's trying, in his limited way. He's not good at admitting he's wrong. You know how he is. I did know. Thomas Reynolds had never been the type to acknowledge mistakes or show vulnerability. Apologizing would require him to admit he'd spent 13 years being cruel and unjust, that he'd thrown away a relationship with his daughter over nothing. That was a lot to expect from a man who'd built his entire identity on being right. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "I think that's entirely up to you. If you want to talk to him, talk to him. If you don't, that's okay too. You don't owe him anything, Laura. Not after what he put you through." After we hung up, I finally listened to the voicemails. The first few were brief, awkward. "It's your father. Call me back. We need to talk. Claire gave me your number. Please call." The most recent one was longer. His voice sounded older, rougher. "Laura, it's Dad. I've been trying to reach you. I know I don't have any right to expect you to call back. What I said at the wedding, what I've said for years, I was wrong. I don't know how to fix this, but I'd like to try. If you're willing. No pressure. Just call me when you're ready." I saved the voicemail but didn't respond. Not yet. Years of silence weren't undone by one embarrassing moment at a wedding and a few uncomfortable phone calls. If Thomas wanted reconciliation, he was going to have to work for it. He was going to have to sit with the uncertainty the way I'd sat with his rejection for over a decade. My life continued. I returned to base, threw myself back into work. There were new recruits to train, missions to plan, the steady rhythm of military life that I'd come to rely on. My commanding officer, who'd heard about the wedding incident through James, pulled me aside one day. "You doing all right, Captain?" "Yes, sir. Family situations can be complicated. If you need time to sort things out, I appreciate that, sir, but I'm fine." "Really?" He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You're one of the best officers I've worked with, Reynolds. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. I won't, sir. And I wouldn't. Whatever happened with Thomas, whether we eventually found some kind of peace or remained permanently estranged, it wouldn't change who I'd become. I'd built a career based on merit and dedication. I'd earned respect from people whose opinions actually mattered. I had a sister who loved me and a brother-in-law who valued what I'd done for him. That was enough. 3 weeks after the wedding, I finally called Thomas back. Not because I was ready to forgive him or because I thought one conversation would heal everything, but because Claire deserved not to be caught in the middle anymore. Because carrying anger forever is exhausting, and I was tired. He answered on the second ring. Laura, I got your messages. Silence. Then, thank you for calling back. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. More silence. Neither of us knew how to start this conversation, how to bridge the gap of 13 years with words. Wrote. I'm not good at this. At apologizing. At admitting I was wrong. I know. But I was wrong. About a lot of things. About you. About what you were doing. About what it meant. I let my pride and my grief turn me into someone your mother wouldn't have recognized. The mention of Mom hit harder than I expected. She would have been ashamed of how you treated me. Yes. He said it simply, factually. She would have been. We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully navigating around the deepest hurts, not pushing too hard. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. It was just acknowledgement of what had been broken, of what might never be fully repaired, of the possibility that maybe, someday, we could find a new kind of relationship that didn't rely on pretending the past 13 years hadn't happened. When we hung up, I didn't feel elated or relieved. I felt cautious, like I'd cracked open a door that had been sealed shut and wasn't yet sure what would come through it. Thomas had taken the first step, but it was a small step, and there were miles to go before anything resembling trust could be rebuilt. Over the following months, we talked occasionally. Brief calls, stilted at first, gradually becoming slightly less uncomfortable. He asked about my work in general terms, careful not to push too hard for details I couldn't share. I asked about his health, his life. We avoided the deepest wounds, skirting around them like landmines we both knew were there but weren't ready to disarm. Claire was cautiously optimistic. It's progress, she said. Slow progress, but still. James was more skeptical. Just make sure you're doing this for you, not for him. You don't owe him a relationship. I know. But I think I need to try. Not for him, for me. So I can know I did everything I could. The truth was, I wasn't sure where this would end. Whether Thomas and I would eventually rebuild something resembling a father-daughter relationship, or whether we'd just achieve a polite distance that allowed us both to attend family events without drama. Either outcome was better than the wall of silence that had stood between us. But the wedding had changed something fundamental. It had exposed the lie Thomas had been telling himself and everyone else, that I was the one who'd abandoned the family, that my choice to serve was a betrayal. Now people knew differently. Now the truth was out there, publicly stated by someone whose word carried weight. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the daughter who'd saved lives, who'd served with honor, who'd done exactly what I'd set out to do. And if Thomas couldn't be proud of that, if he couldn't recognize the value in who I'd become, that reflected on him, not me. Today, I stand steady. It's been 2 years since Claire's wedding, and my life has continued to evolve in ways I couldn't have predicted. I made major last year, a promotion I'd worked toward for years and earned through consistent performance and leadership. My career is intact, my record speaks for itself, and I've built a reputation within my command that's based on competence and integrity rather than family connections or politics. The circle I've built around me is strong. Fellow officers who've served alongside me, who know what I'm capable of under pressure. Junior enlisted personnel I've mentored, watching them grow into confident professionals. Even civilian friends I've made in various postings, people who see me for who I am rather than who I was supposed to be. My relationship with Thomas remains complicated. We're in contact, but it's careful, bounded by unspoken rules about what we can and cannot discuss. He's never fully apologized for the 13 years of silence, never acknowledged the complete scope of what his rejection cost me. But he's tried, in his limited way, to rebuild something. He asks about my career now, listens when I talk about my work, at least to the extent I can discuss it. Last Thanksgiving, I went to his house for dinner. First time in 14 years. It was awkward, stilted, full of careful conversation that avoided landmines. Claire and James were there, running interference, keeping things light. At one point, Thomas showed me something in the garage, a project he was working on, a classic car restoration. We stood there looking at the engine, and for a brief moment, it felt almost like old times. Almost. You still remember what I taught you? He asked, gesturing at the engine. Most of it. Haven't had much opportunity to use it, living on base. He nodded, then said quietly, I should have kept teaching you. Should have kept a lot of things going. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging what he'd thrown away. I didn't push, didn't demand more. Just accepted the small concession for what it was. But here's what I've learned. I don't need his approval anymore. It would be nice to have it, nice to have a father who's proud of what I've accomplished. But my worth isn't contingent on his recognition. The military taught me that. My unit taught me that. Every mission I've completed, every life I've helped preserve, every junior officer I've guided, those things have value regardless of whether Thomas Reynolds can see it. When I think back to that night at the wedding, it's not the spit I remember most vividly. It's not even Thomas's face when James called him out. It's the moment right after when I realized I didn't need to defend myself. My service and sacrifice had spoken for me through someone else's voice, and that was more powerful than anything I could have said. Daniel James, standing tall in his dress uniform, reminding my father and everyone else in that room of the truth, that service and sacrifice are not measured by who claps for you at home. They're measured by what you do when it matters, by the lives you touch, by the integrity you bring to difficult situations. The family bond one lost was painful. I won't pretend otherwise. There are still moments when I see fathers and daughters who have easy relationships, who haven't spent years estranged, and I feel the ache of what I missed. Holidays can still be hard. Father's Day passes, and I never quite know what to do with it. But that loss also pushed me to build resilience that can't be taken away. I learned to define myself by my own standards rather than someone else's expectations. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up for you, who have your back when things get difficult, who see your value even when others don't. My Air Force family has been that for me. Claire has been that. James, who could have stayed silent at the wedding but chose to speak up, has been that. Even Aunt Helen, who never stopped reaching out even when I was too hurt to reach back, has been that. The lesson is simple, though it took me years to fully understand it. Respect doesn't always come from where you hoped. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places, and when it does, you realize you don't need to beg for it. You've already earned it. I carry myself differently now than I did at 19, when Thomas first started pulling away. Back then, I was desperate for his approval, willing to bend myself into whatever shape might earn his recognition. I've stopped doing that. I stand up straight in my uniform, knowing exactly what it represents, not rebellion or abandonment, but commitment and sacrifice and the willingness to serve something larger than myself. My decorations aren't for show. Each one represents a specific action, a moment when I made the right call under pressure. The medal I received for the Kandahar extraction sits in a box in my quarters. I don't display it prominently, don't need to. I know what it means, and so do the people who matter. Last month, I was selected to lead a training program for new officers. It's a prestigious assignment, one that will shape the next generation of Air Force leadership. When I called Claire to tell her, she was thrilled. Mom would be so proud, she said, and I believed her. Thomas, when I mentioned it during one of our careful phone calls, said, that sounds important. Not quite pride, not quite approval, but at least acknowledgement. I'll take it. Not because I need it, but because it represents progress, however slow. I've stopped writing unsent letters. I've stopped replaying conversations looking for where I went wrong. I've accepted that some relationships break in ways that can't be fully repaired, and that's okay. You can acknowledge the loss without being destroyed by it. The truth is, I'm good at what I do. Really good. My commanding officers know it. My peers know it. The men and women I've served with know it. That knowledge, that recognition from people whose opinions are based on actual observation rather than preconceived expectations, is worth more than any grudging acceptance from someone who spent 13 years refusing to see me. When I look in the mirror now, I see Captain Laura Reynolds, soon to be Major Reynolds. I see someone who's earned her place, who's proven her worth repeatedly, who's made a difference in ways both large and small. I see my mother's determination and, yes, even some of my father's stubbornness. But mostly I see myself separate from both of them, defined by my own choices and actions. The wedding was a turning point, but not because it changed Thomas or because it gave me some kind of revenge. It was a turning point because it confirmed what I'd already come to understand, that I didn't need his validation to know my own value. James speaking up just made that truth public, forced others to see what I'd already proven to myself. I'm proud of my service. Proud of the lives I've helped save, the missions I've completed, the officers I've mentored. Proud of how I've handled the hardest moments, both in combat zones and in family situations that felt just as fraught. I've learned that grace under pressure isn't just a military skill, it's a life skill, one that serves you whether you're coordinating an extraction or standing across from the father who disowned you. Some stories end with reconciliation, with tearful apologies and fully healed relationships. This isn't one of those stories. Thomas and I have achieved something more modest, a carefully maintained truce, a relationship that exists but doesn't demand either of us to pretend the past didn't happen. And that's enough. It has to be enough, because you can't force someone to see you differently, can't make them understand what they're determined not to see. All you can do is live your life with integrity, build relationships with people who appreciate you, and trust that your actions will speak louder than anyone's judgment. The legacy I'm building isn't about proving my father wrong or making him regret his choices. It's about serving honorably, leading effectively, and helping others succeed. It's about being the kind of officer and person that my mother would have been proud of, that I can be proud of when I look back on my career. That legacy is mine, earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. No one can take it away from me. Not Thomas, not anyone. And that knowledge, that certainty, is the real resolution. Not a happy ending, but a true one. A recognition that respect, once earned, is yours to keep. Today, I stand steady. It's been 2 years since Claire's wedding, and my life has continued to evolve in ways I couldn't have predicted. I made Major last year, a promotion I'd worked toward for years and earned through consistent performance and leadership. My career is intact, my record speaks for itself, and I've built a reputation within my command that's based on competence and integrity rather than family connections or politics. The circle I've built around me is strong. Fellow officers who've served alongside me, who know what I'm capable of under pressure. Junior enlisted personnel I've mentored, watching them grow into confident professionals. Even civilian friends I've made in various postings, people who see me for who I am rather than who I was supposed to be. My relationship with Thomas remains complicated. We're in contact, but it's careful, bounded by unspoken rules about what we can and cannot discuss. He's never fully apologized for the 13 years of silence, never acknowledged the complete scope of what his rejection cost me. But he's tried, in his limited way, to rebuild something. He asks about my career now, listens when I talk about my work, at least to the extent I can discuss it. Last Thanksgiving, I went to his house for dinner. First time in 14 years. It was awkward, stilted, full of careful conversation that avoided landmines. Claire and James were there, running interference, keeping things light. At one point, Thomas showed me something in the garage, a project he was working on, a classic car restoration. We stood there looking at the engine, and for a brief moment, it felt almost like old times. Almost. You still remember what I taught you? He asked, gesturing at the engine. Most of it. Haven't had much opportunity to use it, living on base. He nodded, then said quietly, I should have kept teaching you. Should have kept a lot of things going. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging what he'd thrown away. I didn't push, didn't demand more. Just accepted the small concession for what it was. The dinner itself was an exercise in controlled civility. Thomas had cooked, something he'd started doing more after Mom died, though back then I wasn't around to see it. The turkey was dry, the stuffing too salty, but Claire and I praised it anyway. We talked about safe topics, James's new position at the base, Claire's promotion at work, the neighbor's new dog. Surface-level conversation that kept us all at a comfortable distance. At one point, Thomas excused himself to get something from his study. He came back with a photo album I'd never seen before. "Your mother put this together," he said, setting it on the table. "Before she got too sick. Pictures of you and Claire growing up." I opened it carefully. There I was at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fish I'd caught. At 12, in my soccer uniform, mud-streaked and triumphant. At 16, standing next to Thomas by his truck, both of us holding wrenches. Mom had captioned each photo in her careful handwriting. "My little soldier," read one. "So proud of this girl," read another. "She wanted you to have it," Thomas said. I wasn't ready to give it to you before." I looked at him, this man who'd spent so many years pushing me away, now offering me this piece of my mother, of my history. "Thank you," I managed. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. James, reading the room, suggested we take a walk to work off dinner. Thomas and I ended up alone in the living room, the photo album open between us. "She knew, didn't she?" I said. "Mom, before she died, she knew you'd do this." "Cut me off." Thomas was quiet for a long time. "She worried. She made me promise I'd stay close to both of you. I broke that promise." "Yes, you did." "I don't know how to fix it, Laura." "I don't know if I can." "Maybe you can't," I said. "Maybe this is just what we are now. People who share history but can't get back to what we had." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. Real, painful regret. "You look like her. More now than you did before. Same way of standing, same expression when you're thinking hard about something. I try to be like her. She never let pride get in the way of love." The implication hung there between us. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the criticism embedded in the compliment. "No," he said. "She didn't." I wish I could say the same. But here's what I've learned. I don't need his approval anymore. It would be nice to have it, nice to have a father who's proud of what I've accomplished. But my worth isn't contingent on his recognition. The military taught me that. My unit taught me that. Every mission I've completed, every life I've helped preserve, every junior officer I've guided, those things have value regardless of whether Thomas Reynolds can see it. When I think back to that night at the wedding, it's not the spit I remember most vividly. It's not even Thomas's face when James called him out. It's the moment right after when I realized I didn't need to defend myself. My service and sacrifice had spoken for me through someone else's voice, and that was more powerful than anything I could have said. James standing tall in his dress uniform, reminding my father and everyone else in that room of the truth, that service and sacrifice are not measured by who claps for you at home. They're measured by what you do when it matters, by the lives you touch, by the integrity you bring to difficult situations. I've thought about that moment a lot since then. About how James could have stayed silent, could have let me handle my own family drama. But he didn't. He stood up for me not because I needed him to, but because it was the right thing to do. Because the truth mattered more than keeping peace or avoiding confrontation. That's leadership, real leadership, and it's the kind I try to model in my own command. The training program I'm running now is built on those principles. I tell the new officers on their first day, integrity isn't just about following rules. It's about having the courage to speak up when something's wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about recognizing worth in others, especially when they're being overlooked or dismissed. It's about understanding that your voice carries weight and using it responsibly. Some of them are young, fresh out of the academy, still figuring out who they are as officers and as people. I see myself in them sometimes, that same hunger to prove themselves, that same determination to succeed. I try to give them what I needed at their age, recognition, guidance, and the understanding that their value isn't dependent on any single person's opinion. One of my trainees, Lieutenant Sarah Cortez, reminds me particularly of my younger self. Tough, stubborn, brilliant, and constantly pushing back against people who underestimate her. After a training exercise last month, she stayed back to ask me something. "Major, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." How do you deal with people who don't believe in you? Family, I mean. Not military. I looked at her, this young officer who was clearly carrying her own weight, and decided to be honest. You build your own family. The people who see you clearly, who recognize your worth, those are your people. Blood doesn't automatically make someone family, and family doesn't have to be blood. She nodded, something easing in her expression. That helps. Thank you, ma'am. These moments, these small exchanges where I can offer perspective earned through hard experience, these are part of my legacy too. The family bond one lost was painful. I won't pretend otherwise. There are still moments when I see fathers and daughters who have easy relationships, who haven't spent years estranged, and I feel the ache of what I missed. Holidays can still be hard. Father's Day passes, and I never quite know what to do with it. But that loss also pushed me to build resilience that can't be taken away. I learned to define myself by my own standards rather than someone else's expectations. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up for you, who have your back when things get difficult, who see your value even when others don't. My Air Force family has been that for me. Claire has been that. James, who could have stayed silent at the wedding but chose to speak up, has been that. Even Aunt Helen, who never stopped reaching out even when I was too hurt to reach back, has been that. The lesson is simple, though it took me years to fully understand it. Respect doesn't always come from where you hoped. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places, and when it does, you realize you don't need to beg for it. You've already earned it. I carry myself differently now than I did at 19, when Thomas first started pulling away. Back then, I was desperate for his approval, willing to bend myself into whatever shape might earn his recognition. I've stopped doing that. I stand up straight in my uniform, knowing exactly what it represents, not rebellion or abandonment, but commitment and sacrifice and the willingness to serve something larger than myself. My decorations aren't for show. Each one represents a specific action, a moment when I made the right call under pressure. The medal I received for the Kandahar extraction sits in a box in my quarters. I don't display it prominently, don't need to. I know what it means, and so do the people who matter. Last month, I was selected to lead a training program for new officers. It's a prestigious assignment, one that will shape the next generation of Air Force leadership. When I called Claire to tell her, she was thrilled. Mom would be so proud, she said, and I believed her. Thomas, when I mentioned it during one of our careful phone calls, said, "That sounds important." Not quite pride, not quite approval, but at least acknowledgement. I'll take it. Not because I need it, but because it represents progress, however slow. I've stopped writing unsent letters. I've stopped replaying conversations looking for where I went wrong. I've accepted that some relationships break in ways that can't be fully repaired, and that's okay. You can acknowledge the loss without being destroyed by it. The truth is, I'm good at what I do. Really good. My commanding officers know it. My peers know it. The men and women I've served with know it. That knowledge, that recognition from people whose opinions are based on actual observation rather than preconceived expectations, is worth more than any grudging acceptance from someone who spent 13 years refusing to see me. When I look in the mirror now, I see Major Laura Reynolds. I see someone who's earned her place, who's proven her worth repeatedly, who's made a difference in ways both large and small. I see my mother's determination and, yes, even some of my father's stubbornness. But mostly I see myself separate from both of them, defined by my own choices and actions. The wedding was a turning point, but not because it changed Thomas or because it gave me some kind of revenge. It was a turning point because it confirmed what I'd already come to understand, that I didn't need his validation to know my own value. James speaking up just made that truth public, forced others to see what I'd already proven to myself. I'm proud of my service. Proud of the lives I've helped save, the missions I've completed, the officers I've mentored. Proud of how I've handled the hardest moments, both in combat zones and in family situations that felt just as fraught. I've learned that grace under pressure isn't just a military skill, it's a life skill, one that serves you whether you're coordinating an extraction or standing across from the father who disowned you. Some stories end with reconciliation, with tearful apologies and fully healed relationships. This isn't one of those stories. Thomas and I have achieved something more modest, A carefully maintained truce, a relationship that exists, but doesn't demand either of us to pretend the past didn't happen. And that's enough. It has to be enough, because you can't force someone to see you differently, can't make them understand what they're determined not to see. All you can do is live your life with integrity, build relationships with people who appreciate you, and trust that your actions will speak louder than anyone's judgment. The legacy I'm building isn't about proving my father wrong or making him regret his choices. It's about serving honorably, leading effectively, and helping others succeed. It's about being the kind of officer and person that my mother would have been proud of, that I can be proud of when I look back on my career. That legacy is mine, earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. No one can take it away from me. Not Thomas, not anyone. And that knowledge, that certainty, is the real resolution. Not a happy ending, but a true one. A recognition that respect, once earned, is yours to keep. That night didn't give me back the years I lost, but it gave me clarity. I don't need his approval to know my worth. If this hit close to home, tell me where you're watching from and share your story below. I read every comment. Tap like, subscribe for more true boundary stories, and share this with someone who needs it today. Questions for you. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by family? How did you respond, walk away, or speak up? If you were in my place, would you have confronted him or let the groom's word stand? Where's your line? Rebuild slowly or keep ghost contact and move on? What's one boundary you set that changed a relationship, for better or worse? If you could say one sentence to the person who underestimated you, what would it be?